The scene begins in a store, where the protagonist has come to sell the potions he crafted. The shopkeeper hands him the payment and hopes that he will return again. The protagonist thanks him and leaves, pondering whether he should have trained in combat skills. However, he possesses a cheat skill, a skill he gained when he first arrived in this world. Despite the opportunity, he chose to focus on non-combat skills, which led him to live as an alchemist, creating and selling various items. He has never had any interest in adventure. The ingredients needed to create valuable products can only be found in dangerous places, making them prohibitively expensive to obtain. On the other hand, the harbor is flooded with simple, mass-produced items, which makes it difficult for him to sell his goods. Newcomers to the market must work tirelessly to produce goods that others are already selling, but this approach is neither efficient nor profitable, leaving them constantly busy without much reward. The protagonist has kept his skills a secret, so he can't afford to hire any employees. As he walks by a slave shop, he notices a slave tied up outside. Since they use magical contracts to bind slaves, he realizes that any information about him would need to be kept secret. Though he dislikes the idea, he knows that employing such a person could benefit his work. He decides to enter the shop, asking if he can take a look at the available slaves. The shop owner welcomed him, noting that he hadn't seen the boy around before, and asked what kind of slave he was looking for. The boy requested one who was suitable for manual labor and dedicated to her work. The shopkeeper recommended a female slave, explaining that she was obedient, didn't tire easily, and was well-trained. He also added that while she wasn't particularly attractive, she was decent in bed and had been thoroughly trained. The boy looked at the price and realized he had enough money to afford her. The slave called him master and, with a touch of emotion, explained that many men had come to the shop before. She feared that if one of them bought her, she would be mistreated. She pleaded for him to help her. The boy felt conflicted. He didn't want to think about doing something so cruel to her, but the shopkeeper didn't seem to be a wealthy man. He decided that if he bought her, he could set her free. The shopkeeper responded dismissively, suggesting the girl should present herself to the boy. As she did, the boy turned her face away gently, telling her it was fine and not to worry about it. His attention was drawn to a small cart nearby, where he noticed a young girl, but there was no price tag on her. The shopkeeper explained that the girl was an elf who had been with him since she was young. She had been coerced into coming here years ago and was now missing her limbs, eyes, and eardrums. He couldn't sell her, as she was no longer in a condition to attract buyers. However, since elf blood was valuable, he kept her around. Lately, though, she had stopped bleeding entirely, and the shopkeeper hinted that he would soon cut her up and sell her parts. The boy thought that the elf's magic had likely been exhausted, which was why she couldn't regenerate. He considered buying her. The shopkeeper mentioned that she had been so badly beaten that she was barely recognizable. He explained that they couldn't help it. The boy continued, commenting that fresh elf organs were difficult to find. He asked if he could get a discount if he purchased both the elf and the other slave together. Upon realizing the boy was an alchemist, the shopkeeper offered to sell the two for 200,000 zeni. The boy agreed to the price. The shopkeeper thought the boy was paying too much, figuring he could have lowered the price further, especially given the girl's poor condition. The shopkeeper then asked him to sign the contract. He explained that slaves were bound by a magical contract, which, without the enchantment, would cause many problems. He then went on to explain the basics of the slave contract. The boy was surprised to learn that he would have to pay the slave a salary. The shopkeeper asked if the boy didn't know about it, and explained that if slaves worked hard, even those of low status could eventually earn the honor of becoming citizens of the country. This system had been in place for over 100 years, and he seemed unaware of the barbaric practices in other countries. The boy then inquired about the conditions of the contract for the elf, to which the shopkeeper responded that, having been a slave for 100 years, her conditions were simple. First, the master's orders were absolute. Second, she must preserve her own life, unless doing so would violate the first rule. There were no individual conditions. Since there was no salary for her, the shopkeeper assumed the boy planned to cut her up anyway. Now, with the contract ready, he instructed the boy to extend his right hand. They both joined hands, and the shopkeeper began chanting. The boy felt pain as the magic took hold. The shopkeeper told him not to move, and after a moment, the contract was finalized. The boy wondered what would happen if the elf broke the contract. The shopkeeper replied that it was essentially a form of hypnosis, and she wouldn't be able to break it, nor could the boy. The shopkeeper handed over the bill for 200,000 zeni and gave him a week to pay. He explained that the receipt was cursed if the boy was even a day late, his health would start to deteriorate. The boy thought to himself that he would never quite get used to the way things worked in this world. He took the receipt and carried it with him, though the slave offered to carry it for him. The boy thought about how much longer the elf's body could hold out, realizing he needed to act quickly to restore her magic. Using his magic, he pulled out a piece of paper, causing the slave to marvel at his ability to use magic. He explained that it was an elvish magic restoration recipe. She noticed something appearing on the paper and pointed it out. He realized that what was appearing wasn't real magic, it was part of his cheat skill. His cheat skill allowed him to access a universal recipe list, ranging from simple dishes like curry to more complex concoctions, such as the elixir of eternal youth. The skill could display up to 5 recipes at a time, and as long as he followed the instructions, the results would be perfect. Once a recipe was completed, it would disappear from the list. The boy tried to tear the page, remarking that it wasn't difficult, and called out to the elf. She introduced herself as Nora. He then mentioned that he would get the first half of the payment and suggested they meet at the plaza. He asked if she knew where the plaza was. She nodded but admitted that she couldn't read. He smiled and suggested they go together. She offered once more to take care of the bags. After walking for a while, they arrived at his house. Nora looked up at the mansion and remarked that it was beautiful. He explained that he needed plenty of space for mixing. They both entered the house to rest, and he told her that they would begin healing the elf now. For that, they would need to boil some water. Nora asked if she could do something properly. She introduced herself as Nora, explaining that she was utterly devoted to her master and would do anything he required, no matter what it was. Shyly, he introduced himself as Paracelsus and said it was nice to meet her. They gathered the necessary ingredients for the healing process. Paracelsus explained that these were the things he had on hand for now, and they didn't have much time. As he began preparing, Nora observed that it seemed like cooking. He agreed, saying it was similar. She asked why they couldn't just have the elf drink a mana potion. He explained that mana potions were only suitable for humans, not elves. He then moved on to the next preparation, explaining to Nora that elves had a higher astral body percentage compared to humans. If the elf were healthy, it would be fine, but in her current state, she likely wouldn't be able to tolerate it. Nora hesitated but then replied that once the elf recovered, Paracelsus would likely dismember her, and she would help prevent the cows before that. He replied that he wasn't planning on doing such things. His goal was to get her healthy first, and then he would try to repair her body as much as he could. Nora asked if that was because elves were rare. He nodded and agreed, then added now as that was done, so let's check the elf's condition. As they began to examine her, Nora asked if he knew the elf's name. He replied that he didn't, as the shopkeeper hadn't provided it. He moved closer to the elf, speaking softly, not knowing if she could hear him, but saying that he was going to examine her now. He started from the top. He found an old wound on her ear. Her eardrums were shredded, as if someone had deliberately cut them repeatedly so they couldn't regenerate. She was missing both hands and feet. Her arms had been severed just above the upper arms, and her legs were missing above the knees. Despite the severity of her injuries, her eyelids were still intact, though both eyes were gone. All of her teeth were missing, her tongue had been cut out, and her entire body, including half her face, was covered in burn scars. She was breathing slowly, but there was no response when he gently tapped her shoulder. Her skin was in terrible condition, likely a result of being kept in an unhygienic environment, which made him feel that the situation was even worse than he had imagined. He called Nora over, asking her to check the lower part of the elf's body for any additional wounds. Nora examined her carefully and remarked that the elves and humans aren't that different. Paracelsus asked her to simply inform him if there were any wounds or bleeding. Nora replied that everything was fine and the elf would be well taken care of there. He mentioned that he hadn't yet boiled the water and suggested that Nora draw some from the well in the garden. She agreed, but just as he turned to leave, he added that he would fetch the water himself and that Nora should stay and watch over the elf. As he walked away, Nora called after him, asking why he didn't handle all the physical labor himself. Being so close to her, Paracelsus felt a bit flustered. Turning to face her, he explained that he preferred it this way, adding that she was so pretty that he didn't want to worry about her getting hurt. Nora insisted she would draw the water, but when he told her to stop, she replied that it was her responsibility to handle the housework. If he truly wanted her to stop, she said, he should simply order her. She opened the door to go, but he stopped her with a command to stay there and be a good girl. Nora replied that he shouldn't speak to her like that, but Paracelsus, being so kind to women, was a bit too soft. She warned him to be careful, as his slaves might take advantage of his generosity. They both worked together to fill the magic restoration bath, and Paracelsus commented that the temperature seemed just right. With Nora's help, he gently lifted the elf to ease her into the water. Nora wondered aloud why they didn't just have the elf drink the medicine. Paracelsus explained that her stomach had been empty for so long that it would likely reject the medicine, but by soaking her in the bath, it would be absorbed slowly into her body. Afterward, he asked Nora to hold the elf's head steady. As his hand dipped into the water, Paracelsus thought to himself that if the magic was soaking in properly, the mana in the tub should gradually decrease. He picked a few flowers to add to the bath, and Nora asked what they were. Paracelsus explained that the white flowers had healing properties that absorbed mana. Once they were full, they would turn a deep blue color. As the flowers absorbed the mana, Nora remarked that Paracelsus' magic was incredible. He responded that it wasn't magic, but rather the natural process. Once the flowers reached their limit, they would slowly revert to white, and then they would add more potion. Nora pointed out that the flowers were already white again, and she asked if that process was always so fast. Paracelsus guessed they hadn't added enough mana, explaining that for a human, it would take an entire day's worth of magic to reach that level. Shortly after, the flowers turned blue again, then reverted to white. Paracelsus could sense that the elf was incredibly weak, and as he added the potion, he wondered where the other bottle was. He set off to search, reflecting on how he hadn't known elves could absorb magic through their skin so quickly, and more surprisingly, how the elf was still alive in such a state. Nora called out to him, telling him that the elf's hair was glowing, marveling at his magic. Paracelsus replied that it wasn't the medicine causing the glow. When Nora asked why the elf's hair was glowing, Paracelsus explained that they needed to keep a close watch on her. Besides the glow, he noticed that her body seemed hazy when they weren't looking closely. If he touched her, his hand passed through with no sensation. It was as if her body was composed of something far more than mere physical form. Nora, feeling slightly dizzy as she touched the elf, commented that the elves must have incredibly strong astral bodies. Paracelsus thought to himself that Nora surely had many questions to ask, but for now he was focused. He had encountered astral bodies before, and this one felt different, less substantial, as though it was something he had seen in his alchemy studies. It reminded him of the primary material that her body seemed to be composed of. When Nora asked what that material was, he explained that magic users referred to it as mana. While there were many magic users, this was the term most commonly used. Paracelsus then began to explain further, recalling the fundamental elements fire, air, water, earth along with the astral body, physical body, and mental state. Everything in the world, he said, was created from a fundamental material known as prima materia. Sorcerers used it to perform the miracles known as magic, while alchemists used it to create various material substances. Any power capable of creating miracles was collectively known as magic. When prima materia was used as a vessel for the soul, the result was an astral body, which then coexisted with the physical body. Paracelsus began to wonder if it might be possible to use prima materia in place of the astral body. As the idea took shape in his mind, he mentioned that he didn't fully understand all of it, but they had been fortunate so far. With a bit more luck, they might be able to restore the elf's entire body. He mentioned that the physical body and spirit were unique to each individual, and if he tried to create a new part for her, no matter how carefully it was crafted, any slight difference in its composition would cause her body to reject it as a foreign substance. On the other hand, prima materia was the foundational element of all things and couldn't be broken down any further. No matter where it came from, all prima materia was the same, and if he could form an arm out of it, there was a high probability it would integrate with her body. If only he could obtain a large quantity of prima materia. For a moment, he felt a surge of excitement, but it quickly turned to sadness. When Nora asked why, he explained that prima materia had an inherent desire to become solid matter. Once transformed, it could never be reclaimed. While trace amounts of it could be found in the air and in other matter, they would be of little use for their purpose. He then pulled out the prima materia he had collected over the course of a year. For now, however, their focus needed to be on restoring the elf's strength. He asked Nora to help him get her back to the bed. Afterward, he went off to search for something in his experiment room. Nora came by and asked what he was doing. He replied that he was conducting research on the elves and then asked how the elf was doing. Nora replied that she had died off but was now sleeping. He said that it was good and he couldn't have done any of that without her help, and for that he thanked her sincerely. She began to tremble, and as she sank to her knees, he wondered what was happening to her. She reassured him that she was fine and then explained that it was the effect of his praise. She felt so good hearing it, so there was no need for him to worry. Paracelsus apologized for causing her discomfort. She smiled and told him it was fine, adding that he should give her more thanks and praise. Just then, he noticed her hand touching the seal. She pulled out a scroll, saying it was her payment. As she received it from him, Words began to appear on the scroll as if written automatically. He told her he hadn't said anything. She replied that it wasn't about what he said, it was what was in his heart. When he mentioned he couldn't have done it without her, she assumed it was due to some kind of profit. Since she couldn't read the writing on the scroll, she asked him to read it for her. He agreed and told her that she had earned a 3% share, amounting to 25,000 zeni. Paracelsus was grateful for her help. She was happy as well, mentioning that with such a rate, she would be free in no time. He then handed her a pouch, saying it contained 20,000 zeni to pay the slave master. She nodded in agreement. Paracelsus then gave her a second share, telling her it was 2,000 zeni for new clothes, and that she didn't need to return any change, she could spend it however she wished. She replied that while she might be a slave, she wasn't a beggar. She was going to work hard to earn her freedom, and insisted that she would give him back the change. He sat there, trying not to laugh, and then said that she was his property, and he wanted her to get clean clothes and rest so she could work hard the next day. He told her to think of it as an investment. She agreed, then mentioned that she would also buy some clothes for the elf. He mentioned that it was a good idea, so just go ahead. As she walked, Nora's thoughts drifted back to her past. She remembered when she had arrived, injured, her hands bound tightly. A man had told the shop owner that perhaps they should stick to buying slaves within the country, as he had never encountered one as rude as she was. The shop owner had brushed it off, saying it was likely a mistake. The man had added that they could hit her as much as they liked. The shop owner had remarked that he hated dealing with people who didn't know how to handle slaves, and that the contract was completely incoherent. He would have to rewrite it from scratch. As Nora sat quietly at the side, the man had called her over, telling her to go and greet the older slaves, as manners were important in that world. He had seemed to think that they could make something out of her yet. He replied to "Don't worry, and they will educate her and make her the perfect slave." Nora had asked him to teach her how to read the language of that country. She was determined to study every book she could, and one day leave the country. The man asked if she was stupid, questioning who would be willing to buy a rude, ugly slave like her. He added that it would be a miracle if they had any books at all. She retorted that someone like him was even more foolish than she was, so there was no need for her to learn to read. But if she somehow did manage to learn, she'd just pretend she didn't know. She was to sit quietly and smile while they read the same thing to her over and over. He said he would teach her how to handle men, and after that it would be up to whatever fool decided to buy her. He grabbed her face, explaining that, from her point of view, her situation seemed hopeless. But even at rock bottom, there were rules and ways to make a profit. Perhaps she would earn a fortune and gain her freedom. She stopped thinking about it, and that evening, while he was lying on the couch reading, Nora came by and announced that the bath was ready. He agreed, then mentioned that the book seemed interesting. When she asked what he was reading, she inquired why elves no longer lived forever. He replied that it was because they had fallen in love with humanity. He gestured to the book, inviting her to look. She sat beside him, touching his arm, and said that even though she couldn't read, she would try to look. He felt uneasy and stood up to show her. She admitted that she couldn't read the text. Looking at her dress, he remarked that it was all there was to see. She explained that she had brought it with her for a change, and he told her she could use it as she wished. She did so, but it seemed that he wasn't pleased with that. He denied it, telling her that she could look as much as she liked. She responded that he might as well touch her, since she was his property. He tried, but when his finger barely made contact, he was shocked and pulled back. She asked what had happened. He explained that if he touched her body, she would demand a huge payment from him. She replied that if he believed that, then it would be true. He commented that she was beautiful, and that's why she let him touch her, leading to her earning a great deal of money. He guessed she was being honest and said he wouldn't touch her again. He had bought her to help him with work, not for that purpose. Afterward, he grabbed her by the waist. As he did, he realized how it felt like she melted for a moment, then bounced back, soft and plump. She wondered aloud if that was worth enough, then grabbed him and offered to show him just how much she could earn. As she did, he told her to wait, warning that it would come out soon, but money wouldn't. She asked if he wanted to stop, then continued enjoying it. He found himself liking it as well. The next morning, as they woke, he asked her about the money. She replied that it was about 2 million zeni, and added that he was very generous. He responded that it wasn't like he could help it. Maybe slaves weren't meant for him, and she would be free after one more day. With not much left to offer her, he promised to pay her later. She replied that if she made him pay all at once, he might end up being the slave himself. Thanking her, he grabbed her hand and said that, even though it had only been a day, he had enjoyed spending time with her. He promised to be there for her even after she was free, and she could ask him for anything if she needed it. She pulled back, asking what he meant. She wasn't planning to quit being his slave. Where else could she earn 2 million zeni in a single day? She intended to stay and earn even more, so if he didn't want that, he should just give her orders. He became frustrated and asked if she couldn't just come back to work for him once she was free. She replied that if she did, the slave contract would be broken. He agreed, guessing that it was the best arrangement for her. She then asked if he was sure about that, and what if she took all of his money. He replied that it worried him a bit, but he was lucky to have such a wonderful person by his side. It might sound strange, but the more money he gave her, the happier he felt. He promised to do his best to earn more and asked her to stay as long as she wanted. After saying that, he left. As Nora sat in her room, he entered with a stack of papers, mentioning that the elf needed an expensive magic recovery potion and that he also wanted to restore her body. He added that this had left him with a large debt to Nora, so he was thinking of ways to earn some money. She agreed, saying it was a good idea. As he placed the papers on the table, she asked what they were. He replied that they were records of everything he had synthesized so far using alchemy. He explained that they would look through these records to find something that could earn them money. She reminded him that she wouldn't be able to read. He agreed, and then showed her some letters for reference, explaining that S was the most amazing grade and C the least. He continued, explaining that there would be a table in the upper right corner of the records. The table showed the marketplace value, alchemy difficulty, danger level, materials required, etc., though his subjective feelings were mixed in, so it might not be entirely accurate. He gave the example of mithril silver. It was difficult to obtain and synthesize, but there was no risk of serious injury. Once completed, it was easy to store and could be sold at a higher price. He explained that they should first focus only on records with storage difficulty and danger levels at the bottom, marked as B, C, or CC. Nora told him to leave that part to her. As she worked, he guided her, and after some time, she mentioned that it was finally over. Paracelsus told her to leave the records with a difficulty level of B or C in terms of acquiring materials. Then they should focus on the remaining records with alchemy difficulty and danger levels of S and A, as those would be the best candidates for alchemy. He then asked if she hadn't looked at the marketplace, suggesting it would be better to choose items that were easier to obtain or create. Nora, wanting to earn money, agreed, but she pointed out that such items were hard to come by or made from expensive materials. If they couldn't sell them, they would incur a loss. Paracelsus emphasized that he prioritized ease of crafting and resistance to quality degradation. She understood and asked if that meant the alchemy difficulty and danger level were high because the items would be hard to make and risky to craft. She wondered aloud that if they were difficult to make and failed, they would become unsellable. If they got injured, there would be a total loss. He reassured her that it wouldn't be a problem and promised to explain why later. For now, they needed to start sorting them out. She agreed but insisted that they shouldn't attempt anything that would put them in danger, as getting hurt would result in a loss. Paracelsus knew that of remaining records, 3 promising items stood out: the magic bomb, the luck potion, and the correspondence bell. Nora asked what he was thinking of making, and she suggested the luck potion. He agreed, saying that before they continued, he wanted to explain something about the process. However, before doing so, he wanted to confirm a few things first. He asked if a command to keep a secret, given under the slave contract, would remain valid even after she was freed from the contract. She denied it, explaining that everything in the contract was binding only while they were still under it. Once the contract was released, all secrets would be forgotten, and any commands regarding them would no longer be executed. He stated that the ability to interfere with memories was quite a powerful spell. She agreed, explaining that a very long spell was written inside the slave room. The contract itself included hex rituals, making it an incredibly powerful magical spell. She added that the top clause of the contract, which stated that they were slaves, was not weak by any means. Paracelsus mentioned that she seemed quite knowledgeable, like a magician. She flustered, saying that she didn't know anything, and that most of it was just things she had heard from slave traders. He responded that it was fine and asked her to tell him more. She thought for a moment and then said that was all she knew. He mentioned that he would like to take a look at the long spell. He might not understand it because he wasn't familiar with the magic, but he was curious. However, she refused, explaining that it was the only place the slaves could touch. No one was allowed to step inside, and if he tried, a powerful hex would be triggered and send him back. He apologized, thinking that a strong hex binding their lives to the slave contract was in place, and it could be said that an equally strong hex was affecting him, the contracting party. There was also a difference in status, with each party bound by the contract, and if he wasn't careful, he might end up being a slave as well. He knew he had to be cautious. She assured him that she wouldn't leak any secrets, and that she was good at doing her job properly. He replied that he knew, but he was about to mention something important. He explained that time was a valuable resource, something an alchemist would do anything to acquire, and it would be disastrous if the wrong people, bad guys, found out and targeted her as someone close to him. She replied that even if she were tortured, she wouldn't reveal any secrets. He asked if she didn't think that was a waste of getting hurt. She answered that choosing a job and taking responsibility for it were two different things. He then apologized and gave her an order. He told her that if the contract was ever released, or if anyone other than him asked about the secret, she was to forget the memory. It was an order, she agreed, and he continued. He revealed that he was from a different world. He reminded her that in his past world there was no magic. There were things he didn't like about that world, but it wasn't entirely bad. He couldn't return to his world anymore, so he would spare the details. He explained that he had been hit by a vehicle called a truck and had died. When he woke up, he found himself sitting in front of an old man named Arius. Arius greeted him, mentioning that he had been reincarnated into a different world. Paracelsus was shocked to hear that. Arius then told him that he had something special prepared for his birth and that Paracelsus could choose 2 cheat skills from a catalog he was given. Paracelsus wondered what kind of world this was and why he had been brought here. He also thought that based on the circumstances, he might change his decision about which skills to choose. Arius, growing impatient, told him that he was acting like a pain and to hurry up and choose. Paracelsus asked for forgiveness and mentioned that he didn't like fighting skills. He didn't want to waste time on them, so he thought of selecting something more practical that could be used in any situation and save him in a pinch. He said that he would like to have the recipe for all creations and a skill to save his progress as a maker. Arius responded that it was kind of a pain, but he agreed and made Paracelsus sleep. He explained that whenever he woke up next time, he would be in a different world. Arius then told him that the reason for his reincarnation didn't matter, so Paracelsus could just do whatever he wanted in this new life. When Paracelsus woke up, he found himself in a different world, and somehow, the cheat skills were already in his head. He wasn't sure if Nora would believe him, but he couldn't help thinking about it. Nora interrupted him, saying that whether she believed it or not, they could deal with that later. She then wondered if the power he received from the old man was related to alchemy. He agreed, telling her that he would explain the skill to her. He then took out the book and began to explain the first skill, the recipe for all creation. He explained that they could write any item in the notebook he had, and the ingredients to make it would appear, along with the procedure. They could list up to 5 items in the slots, and the paper was infinite, although adding more items would tire him. If multiple items were listed, he could choose which one to focus on mentally. The owner of the book could create any recipe with 100% accuracy, as long as the ingredients and procedures were followed. Once the recipe was completed, it would vanish from the slot. He then explained the save maker skill. Whenever he wanted, he could create a gem called a save point, which would allow him to advance. If he attempted to create a new one, the previous one would be destroyed. He couldn't remember the time he spent from the moment he used the skill until it was broken, and the memories he made before it broke were lost. He had avoided using the skill because he feared losing his memories, so instead, he relied on the list in the recipe for all creation. He knew that the skills were incompatible, and he felt it would be disastrous if the save point broke by accident. Therefore, he usually kept it locked away in a mithril silver box, which wasn't locked, but people without permission couldn't perceive its existence. Even when the box was placed in front of them, Paracelsus asked Nora if she could see it. She wondered if it was truly there. Paracelsus continued, explaining that he would set up a letter so she would see it as well. In case he were to die, he wanted her to break the gem. She responded that she couldn't do that. If he were to die, the command he had given her to forgive would be carried out, and she wouldn't be able to remember it, nor would she be able to recall the gem. Paracelsus explained that he simply wanted some insurance in the worst-case scenario. She then mentioned a bomb she was planning to make. He wondered if he should order her to never forget about the box. She replied that decisions shouldn't be made lightly, as she believed the power was difficult to handle. She suggested they think carefully and decide later. Afterward, Paracelsus asked if she had any other questions. She asked him to demonstrate the power of the recipe for all creation skill to see if it was real, and to make another gem. When he inquired about her reasoning, she replied that they should proceed with it, as she would learn all of his secrets. He took her to show the Hermes gold coin and explained that it was one of the coins issued by the Alchemy Association. He asked her to follow him. As she wondered about the Alchemy Association, he explained that it was a gathering of many great alchemists who strive to improve their standing in the art of alchemy in general. He took her outside the house, continuing that when it came to gold coins, alchemists were second to none. In front of them was the image of Hermes Trismegistus, the father of alchemy and a symbol of wealth. On the back was the image of a gecko owl, symbolizing wisdom. In this country, a lunar eclipse was considered a symbol of bad luck and illness. With 100 Hermes coins, a medium-sized fish tank, some gravel, algae, and goldfish eggs, he demonstrated the process. He even mentioned that it was his first time doing this. These were the ingredients to create luck, and by this process he would prove the power of his recipe for all creation skill. He then asked her to stand in front of the fish tank and drop a coin from a certain height. After dropping the coin, he explained that Hermes smiled upon them, and they had accumulated 1 unit of luck. He then dropped the coin again, but this time it landed on the owl side, causing them to lose the luck. They picked up the coin and started over. Once they had dropped all the coins, they added the gravel and algae on top, leaving it to settle for a day. When the water quality stabilized, they added the goldfish eggs. After they hatched, the fish would become luck fish. He placed the coin in the water once more. Nora wondered aloud if it was hard to get the Hermes face up 100 times in a row. He replied that the coin gave blessings which made it difficult. She asked if that was considered alchemy. He responded that, much like turning metal into gold, they were transforming a normal fish into a luck fish, though the effect was weak. She questioned whether there were many fake versions of such a thing, adding that no one would buy it. He mentioned that customers were looking for items with the Alchemy Association certificate, but there were also shady places selling fake certificates, so they had to be cautious. She responded that she shouldn't buy from those places. He then asked if she understood how difficult it was to make a luck fish. She agreed, and then he took out the notebook, saying that he would make the recipe for the luck fish. As he started working, Nora felt like he was enjoying himself. He placed his fingers on his forehead, wondering where the method to use the gold coin was. Nora asked if something was wrong. He nodded and explained that there were many different ways to make the luck fish. After some searching, he found the method and wrote it down in the notebook using magic. Following the recipe, he began dropping the coins, ensuring they landed with the Hermes face up. He needed to make it happen 100 times in a row for the power to be real. He continued dropping the coins several times, and each time, the head landed face up. Now he had achieved 84 in a row, with the head facing up, and he felt the coins in his hand were becoming heavier. She suggested he just hold on for a little while longer. Finally, he placed the 100th coin, and its head was also up. Nora exclaimed that it was amazing. He then asked her if she believed him now. She agreed and asked how the others managed to flip 100 coins in a row. He replied that they used luck items, but it was still extremely difficult. Now, they needed to finish the process, starting with clearing the shot. Next, they would add the gravel. She asked if it was okay for her to help. He suggested they add some algae, but she insisted on doing it herself, saying it was very difficult to farm luck fish and that they could make many with this batch. He didn't recommend making more than what they were already preparing. He then mentioned there were 3 reasons why they couldn't sell them at a high price first. There were many fakes circulating second, the certification fees were extremely high and third. He couldn't let the Alchemy Association know that he had a 100% success rate in making things with such precision. She asked why he didn't want the association to know. He replied that there were many devious characters in the Alchemist Guild, and as a newcomer, anything that made him stand out would draw unwanted attention. It had been a hard struggle just to become a member and obtain a beginner-level alchemy book. She remarked that it was really hard to make money. After that, he said they now had to wait for the fish to hatch. She asked if it was okay to take the gold coins out yet. He replied that the recipe stated they should leave them until the fish had fully grown. As he was heading inside, she asked if it wasn't risky to leave the coins there, given their value. He assured her it was fine. He didn't expect anyone to go near the fish tank, and they were safe there. After he closed the door, she became frustrated. She opened it again to take a look, then glanced back at the water, noticing the faint smell and the shadow of an old building mixed with moisture. She collected a few insects and stabbed them upside down into the ground, chanting for the spirits that slumbered in the land to hear her voice. She revealed that she was a hex mage from a distant land and called upon the spirits to heed her call and listen to her wishes. A strange creature with a giant eye and a skill at its head emerged from the ground, asking if she had called for it. She nodded and mentioned that her master had left treasures outside, and she was concerned that someone might steal them. The creature asked why they had been left there. She replied that Paracelsus was a good person, but he was too naive. As long as she was present, she would pray for his peace daily and, in return, asked for blessings to be bestowed upon her master. The creature agreed, stating that shrouding things was its specialty. It expressed happiness that she had called an elemental spirit like itself, acknowledging that it might not be much, but it would do its best. The creature also told her to call upon it any time. With that, it became emotional. She thanked it, and as the creature sank back into the ground, Nora reflected that it was weak but earnest and easy to handle. It was her first time encountering such a spirit, and she remembered that people often choose to live in places that resonate with the spirits around them. As she entered, Paracelsus suggested they take a look at the recipe of all creation, explaining that the luck potion, anaphoric bell, and magic bond were simply matters of what they chose to create. He began by explaining that the luck potion was similar to the luck fish, as it raised one's luck, and was generally considered a good luck item. The potion's effectiveness depended on its purity, but it was a very practical item. If someone drank it, they would likely encounter fewer monsters, and ranged attacks would be less likely to hit them compared to normal circumstances. He then showed her the main point, explaining that these items were especially important for people whose lives were in constant danger. If they could somehow find a regular among the nobles or the wealthy, they would be set for life. Nora suggested they make one. Paracelsus responded, asking why she was so eager to make it now, as it was mainly for professionals. He suggested they first talk about the drawbacks. The first issue, he explained, was that Alchemy Association certificates were expensive. Nora thought that Paracelsus was simply reminding her of the costs. He went on to explain that the certificates served as proof of the authenticity of the product's creation process, and no one would buy the item without a certificate confirming the legitimacy and effectiveness of its effects. The cost of obtaining the certificate consumed most of the profits from the items, and 20% of what they made would be used to cover testing fees. Nora asked if Paracelsus could prove the item's effectiveness on his own. He replied that, without the certificate, it would be meaningless. She then asked how one could verify the effectiveness of the luck potion. He explained that the process was similar to what they had done with the coin drops, and from what he had heard, they now used insects for such tests. As he talked about always making the quality too high, she became upset and asked what was wrong with having such high-quality items, especially if they could be sold for a very high price. He asked her to calm down and explained that all the luck options were currently C-class or lower, including the fakes and forgeries that were circulating. These were created through a specific process where they liquefy the ingredients, but no matter what, some bad luck inevitably attaches to the final product. No matter how much they tried, the bad luck elements always clung to the luck elements. There were a few B-class luck options, but those were rare. As for a class luck, its very existence was in question. Nora asked what happened when he made such potions. He replied that whenever he crafted them, they were always S-class or SS-class, no matter what. Either that or they ranked beyond that. Being shocked, Nora asked it wasn't that great. He shook his head and explained that if any devious alchemist discovered that Paracelsus was making such high-quality items, they would send golems or familiars to monitor him. Newbie alchemists like him were vulnerable, and he could lose everything just like that. He added that it was fine if others just copied their techniques, but the best talents were often stolen, and each year more disappeared. He asked if she now understood why it's so dangerous to reveal their work. She agreed and suggested they would need some defense and protection. Once they were prepared, they could start making luck potions. If they could get a rich patron for their items, they wouldn't need any certifications and could sell directly, which would allow them to keep more profit. They only needed to synthesize their regular items, and there would be no need for creation, which was a very impressive product in itself. He replied that it wasn't exactly what he had in mind. She then mentioned that they should make him some potions, and he agreed. He suggested now let's move to the next step. He then demonstrated the anaphoric bell, explaining that these synchronized bells ring at the same time as the others. The items created during this process were identical in appearance and had strong effects. He handed over a pair of bells he had made. When Nora tried to ring one, the other rang at the same time, but the sound was different. He explained that this was his failure, and the bells, while sold in the market, had better qualities. Nora asked if the creation would be more successful if he used the same recipe for all his crafting skills. He replied that only one would succeed. The recipe's tower could only complete one item on the list, even if the instructions suggested that multiple items could be made. Once the first item was created, the effects of the recipe would be exhausted, even if the item was part of a pair. Though they were made at the same time, they wouldn't be finished at the same time, meaning the first one made was the perfect one. He continued, explaining that corrections could be applied during the production process. As long as the recipe was followed to the end, he could still create decent items. The key aspect of alchemy, he said, was to make the items as similar as possible. Even if one item in a pair was perfect, the other was still considered a failure if it didn't match. The sound might be off, and the imperfections were clear, making the creation feel incomplete. The peak of the craft lay in both pieces being perfect, and until that was achieved, the work would feel blurry and unfinished. She took a closer look at the bell and mentioned that it seemed the power of the recipe wasn't perfect. He replied that it was a bit inconvenient. She understood and realized that they weren't going to make the bombs. He asked her to wait and hear him out, then placed a magic bomb on the table, explaining that it was made using the principles and techniques of a magician. He warned that it could easily blow up their house. She quickly asked him not to bring such things to the table, frightened, and backed away to the side wall. He reassured her that it was fine as long as the detonator wasn't connected, and they didn't enter the correct code to activate it. He added that, since it was made with the recipe's power, it wouldn't misfire. He explained that the bomb worked by replicating a magician's spell. When the detonator was reached, the signal would travel through the wire and then command the tablet. This would instruct the pre-materia to change the air and fire elements. The air element closest to the tablet would turn into a flammable gas, which would then ignite upon contact with the fire element, causing an explosion. The water element that came into contact with the fire element would be nullified by the air element. As he explained this, he sketched out the process on a piece of paper. She wondered what the water elements on the outer layer were for. He explained that they acted as a fail-safe. In the event that an outside signal penetrated, the water element would transform into water. This would prevent any potential interference by nullifying the fire element, which was incompatible with the water. She wondered what would happen if the bomb burned. He replied that the water element would dissipate if the fire element burned, and the air element wouldn't turn into gas without a command. This would prevent an explosion that could cause fatal wounds or ruptured eardrums. Once they placed a magic blocking cap on the wire, it would be fine and safe. He mentioned that selling bombs was a viable option. Even if they were made using the recipe for all creations, they wouldn't stand out as long as they were handled carefully, so they weren't inherently dangerous. She pointed out that the bomb was placed next to the gem, and if the gem broke, it would trigger an explosion. He agreed, and she suggested that they should continue working on it until they found a better product to replace it. He agreed with her. Nora thought for a moment and asked how strong the gem was before it broke, adding that if the bomb exploded and they both died but the gem didn't break, it would be a laughing matter. He agreed with that observation and told her he would come up with a device that would break the gem when the bomb exploded. He imagined a box with a sliding door that would push into the gem when hit by the blast. There would be a metal component behind the box, which would strike the gem, causing it to break after the explosion. He would also ensure the device was protected so it couldn't interfere with the blast and would remain intact in case of an explosion. He asked Nora if she was okay with the plan. She remarked that he seemed happy and then questioned whether he liked bombs. He replied that it might be the case, admitting that, in reality, he felt excited at the thought of a bomb exploding and destroying everything in its path. Nora told Paracelsus that she thought he was a coward for being afraid of the Alchemy Association. He smiled and replied that bombs were fine because they could control when they exploded. Just then, they heard the sound of a bell ringing, and they wondered if the thing they were waiting for had finally arrived. The person outside wondered aloud if that was the anaphoric bell. Paracelsus recognized the sound immediately, knowing that the bell was connected to the entrance. He had worked so hard to make it, and now he could tell exactly where the ringing was coming from in the house. It was so loud, ringing nonstop. As he opened the door, a girl greeted him, commenting that the ring came from the Armeblic magic shop and that the bell sounded horrible. She had excellent hearing and found the sound unbearable. Paracelsus then introduced the girl to Nora, explaining that she was the slave he had recently contracted for his house. Nora greeted to Tori, introducing herself as well. Tori told Paracelsus that if he had such a pretty girl dressed up like that, it was clear he had good taste. He then clarified to Nora that Totori was from the Armeblic magic shop. Totori bowed in greeting and introduced herself properly. Then she asked Paracelsus if he still felt embarrassed hearing his name spoken so loudly. She added to Nora that when she first met Paracelsus, his face had turned red and he had mumbled something like Gianno or something similar. She had no idea what he was saying and, being very impatient, had almost decided to go home instead of sticking around. With a flustered expression, Paracelsus apologized to Nora for hiding his name. Totori then asked Nora how she had been calling him. Paracelsus quickly mentioned that he wanted to sell something. Totori asked him to show it to her. He revealed the magic bomb, and Totori was shocked to see it. She noticed it was placed carefully on the desk, proving it was truly balanced. However, she found it crazy to leave such a thing in a high place. This, she said, was one of the things she liked about Paracelsus. She then hugged the bomb, commenting that the stabilized elements were packed densely and tightly, producing a sound so pleasant that even the bell couldn't compare to it. Paracelsus, not fond of negotiating, stated that she should give him her best price. Totori, after inspecting it further, offered 90,000 zeni. He responded that he would make 20 more, so could she make it 100,000 zeni? Totori replied that if he could make 20 more with such quality, they could profit from it at a high price, so she suggested 95,000 zeni. As Paracelsus was about to agree, Nora chimed in, suggesting they raise the price to 130,000 zeni. Totori commented that it seemed someone wasn't listening to her. After some back and forth, they finally settled on a price of 102,800 zeni. Totori mentioned that she would bring the materials in 2 parts at a later date. She would deduct the payment for the materials from his pay, and if the quality of the bomb decreased, he would need to remake it. She then asked if she could take the bomb to show her master. Paracelsus agreed and prepared to pack it for her. Totori thanked Paracelsus and then turned to Nora, telling her that her master held study sessions for the slaves free of charge. She hoped that everyone would be interested in attending, as Nora could learn useful skills for daily life. Totori highly recommended that Nora visit whenever she had free time. Paracelsus then told Nora that if she was interested, she could give it a try. Nora replied that she hadn't known such a thing existed. Totori then asked if it was okay to take the bomb now, as she intended to show it to her master. Paracelsus nodded and began packing the bomb for her. As he packed, Totori approached Nora and called her attention. Nora commented that the study group also served as a support group for the slaves. Totori responded that it didn't seem like that, but if Nora ever felt threatened or mistreated, she could always come to her and share anything. Totori then asked if there was anything on Nora's mind. Nora replied that there wasn't anything currently. Totori smiled and said she was glad to hear that Nora had come to Paracelsus and was getting along with him. Meanwhile, Paracelsus wondered whether he should wrap the bomb in oiled paper or a wet cloth. He stepped outside to check on the water tank and was shocked to find a huge rock where it should have been. His mind raced with thoughts of gold coins, and he realized the water tank had been stolen. As he stood there, a strange creature appeared, watching him closely. Paracelsus wondered if he had unknowingly become an intruder. Then Nora approached him, asking him to touch the rock above and describe what it felt like. As he touched it, he mentioned that it felt like a normal rock. She asked him to check his hand after touching it. When he looked, he found that his hand had become wet. She explained that the spirit had shown him an illusion through her power, and the water tank was still there. He wondered if spirits could create such a strong illusion. She replied that spirits could wield powers beyond human abilities and techniques, as long as they were within their territory. He explained that he had heard that elemental spirits were formed when the spirits of dead creatures mingled and combined, and he couldn't believe that a mishmash like that could possess such power. She scolded him for saying such strange things. She reminded him that humans, too, were made from a mishmash of water, grass, and creatures, and she didn't see much of a difference. She also warned that if a spirit became angry, they wouldn't be able to live there, and asked Paracelsus not to speak carelessly. He agreed and commented that this meant she was truly a hex mage. As she bowed to apologize for keeping it a secret, Spirit asked if she was all right. Paracelsus then inquired about the reason for her secrecy. She explained that the old man at the slave shop had told her that people were often unnerved by hex mages, and some might try to take advantage of her, which was why she kept it a secret. And Spirit didn't seem like someone who would take advantage of her, so she asked if he found her creepy. If he did, she would stop. He asked if she thought he found her creepy, then wondered if the spirit was around her. She agreed, and he joined his hands, wondering if he should pray as well. Just as Spirit got close to him, he couldn't see her. She explained that if a spirit were to swallow knowledge, it could become rude and angry, and if it felt threatened, it might choose to possess her body. She advised him to simply give the spirit a respectful nod when passing nearby. Nora mentioned that they hadn't called the spirit. As Paracelsus smiled at Nora, she felt uneasy and wondered why he was smiling at her like that. He replied that he was just so impressed by her that she had told him about it. Later that night, when Nora was in the room with the elf lying there, Paracelsus came to her. She mentioned that she had wiped the Kokomochi's body 4 times and had just finished. When Paracelsus wondered about the Kokomochi, Nora's face became wet as she explained that, in her country's language, Kokomochi meant cute baby. The elf reminded her of the time when she used to take care of her baby sister, and it must have been rude to the elf, who was struggling to survive. Paracelsus said that calling her the elf was a bit impolite, so he thought it would be better to give her a name that Nora could easily say. He mentioned that he would call her Coco until she was properly healed, after which they could ask for her real name. Then he talked about Coco's body regeneration and explained that he was thinking of starting with the skin tissue, as it was thin and could be repaired with a little premateria. Nora asked if it was important to start with the simplest area. He replied that they could graft some skin from her buttocks, which could then be cultivated to multiply like vegetables around her. As he touched her body, her severed legs twitched, causing him to turn away. Nora told him that Coco would surely feel that way if he touched her there. She thought that Coco would be happy if he did so, as it would reassure her that she still had value and wouldn't be discarded. He felt incredibly awkward. Nora then asked him to help Coco. Although he tried, it didn't seem to be working, so Nora mentioned she would help him. Afterward, feeling disappointed, he stood in the corner. Nora called out to him, saying it was done. He apologized. She then mentioned that when Coco was better, she wanted to try something with her. He wondered what she meant, and she placed her hand on his back, using her power to make him tremble. She thought it was the most crucial ability for a hex mage communicating with spirits. Even though it was usually used on spirits, she could use it on a living human to make her voice heard by his spiritual form as long as she touched him directly. He tried to communicate with her, thinking if she could hear his voice. She mentioned that it seemed he had tried, but she didn't hear anything. He then asked if she was planning to try it with Coco. She agreed and explained that he had told her earlier that elves had a substantial spiritual form, and that Coco was a bit different. In any case, Nora would be able to communicate with Coco's spirit, as long as she was alive. At the very least, Nora could make her voice heard, and then they could check the state of Coco's mind and soul. Paracelsus remarked that she was amazing. She replied that, in reality, she had wanted to keep it a secret, but now that he already knew she was a hex mage, there was no point in hiding it. He sat back, feeling a bit scared, and Nora used her power to communicate with Coco. As she touched Coco's body, she felt the presence of a soul, and things seemed to be going well. She tried to make contact, asking if Coco could hear her. When she didn't get a response, she decided to take a peek at Coco's soul but found nothing. The mind of Coco was completely dark, and she couldn't see anything. She did find the soul, but it was heavily cursed. Nora stumbled back, and Paracelsus quickly moved to catch her, asking what had happened. Nora explained that there was an immense curse binding Coco's soul. He wondered if it was different from the slave contract. She replied that it was a hex, a curse, but on a very different level. However, there was something strange about it. For a curse this strong, even if it covered the entire body, it wouldn't be enough. That's why they had used a special room inside her body to contain all the spells. She then looked at the slave room symbol on Coco's chest and explained that it had been created by stretching the skin into a pocket dimension, allowing them to create a large space. This method was usually used for enormous rooms. He was shocked by the amount of skin required. She told him that if she could read the spell written inside, she would be able to understand the curses. He asked her to wait and mentioned that she had said if anyone other than the slave touched the slave room, they would be cursed. She asked him to wait, explaining that normal people could be cursed to death, but she was a hex mage. She then used her hand to open the room. As Paracelsus looked on, he noticed shadows oozing out. She told him that these were the curses and warned him not to touch them. She added that if she didn't return, he should kick the room open and consult an expert hex mage. The black shadows fully enveloped Nora as she mentioned that it was the spell for the slave contract, not for binding the soul. She was trying to search for the soul. There were many curses placed on Coco, which forbade her from doing anything and left her feeling disgraced. She would have to live the rest of her life like this. As she tried to collect the curses in her hands, Paracelsus reached out to her, but she requested that he not come closer. She then gathered the black shadows in her hands. Paracelsus asked if she was fine and mentioned the state of her hands. She replied that the origins of hexing stem from the notion of cursing others, wishing misfortune and discomfort upon them. People found ways to gain power from such pitiful prayers, but she thought that couldn't be right. The first hexer's curse was cast upon his thigh, and once cursed, a person couldn't use their powers for selfish desires. If they did, they would die. People could stop cursing one another, but even then, it would only make things slightly better. The curse, filled with such hope, was one of the things she valued most, and that's why anyone who cursed in such a way was unforgivable. She then felt a sharp pain. Paracelsus urged her to calm down and wondered if she could do something about the curse that was bouncing back at her, quickly making the shadows in her arms subside. She explained that to suppress it, she would need to attune herself to the emotions used to bind the curse and control them, which was very difficult. She placed her head on Coco's and mentioned that it was unexpected. She couldn't believe it, because the emotions used to bind the curse were very tender and deep. He mentioned that as long as she was alive, and if her heart was filled with those emotions, it could help her. She then lay down on the bed, saying that it was true, but currently she was feeling a lot of anger. Maybe they had made the curse like this to make it even harder to deal with. He then took off his shirt, and she asked what he was doing. He replied that he would take her top off as well. He then lay down on the bed beside her, cuddling her from behind, and said that they could try to feel an emotion similar to love. He asked how she was feeling now. She responded that it was dangerous because the curse might transfer to him. He assured her that it was fine and far better than letting her die. He then turned her toward him, stating that it would be better this way. She asked him not to touch the black part of her hands where the shadow was placed. As they stayed like that for a while, she noticed the black shadow beginning to recede from her hands. She told him that she was fine now. He then left her side, and she managed to make all the curses disappear. He mentioned that the curse had gone inside her seal. She explained that it was hard to break the curse, so she forced it into the seal where it couldn't cause any damage. She would deal with it slowly over time. He relaxed, relieved that she was safe, and then asked if she had said something while they were cuddling. She replied that she didn't remember saying anything and asked him to stop repeating things like that, insisting she hadn't said a word. The next morning they were both sitting together. As he was reading something, she wondered if it was a letter. He replied that, if that were the case, it was a scenario where he had forgotten his skills. He had tried to write down everything he could about them, how to use them, what it felt like, and as many details as possible. He wasn't sure how much of his memories about his skills he would retain once he forgot them, and he asked her to tell him to calm down as he read the letter. He feared he would become confused and disoriented by everything. She agreed but wondered why there were 3 letters. He explained that the first was a summary of the events that had transpired when he first arrived in this world, so she should read that one first. The second letter contained everything they had discussed regarding his skills and powers, while the third one was about Nora, with as many details about her as possible. He also had the feeling that those memories would disappear as well. Nora asked him why he thought his skills and powers were more important than her. She noted that the ledger had already reached limits she had never seen before. In that case, if she ever lost her powers, he would be in trouble as well. She then added that she was just joking and promised to show him in a year that she was more important than his powers. He agreed with her but mentioned that, in the worst-case scenario, he would rather not lose his powers at all. He would be truly sad if he forgot about her. She replied that it wasn't a problem and that she would soon take first place. With that, she asked him to start.